And our today's topic is labor rights in Pakistan. First, we should learn that what are the rights, like labor right. Number one is that everyone has the right to work and the choice of the employment. This is the basic fundamental right that if anyone wants to work, so this is his right to go for work, to free choice of employment, and whatever work he or she wanted, so he can adopt it. And the profession or the business, whatever the state allows it, he can do that. And it is up to him that whatever the employment he wants, he can choose it and he can start it. To just and favorable conditions of work. The condition of work must be compatible and suitable for the employees, like they must be given necessary equipments, necessary safety protection, and the protection against unemployment, that if someone is doing a job, so he cannot be kicked out of the job, or he cannot be deprived of the job without any reasonable uh, proof or without any reason. So it is necessary that someone is being fired from a company or the employment, he it must come with a reason and with that benefits which that person, the laborer or the worker, is entitled of. Everyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work, without any discrimination, like without any discrimination of gender. Like if someone or two people are doing the same job and they're doing the same work, so it is right of the labor that he must be paid equally. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि दो लोग एक ही काम कर रहे हैं, एक जैसा काम कर रहे हैं, और एक को आप ज़्यादा पे दे रहे हैं, एक को आप कम पे दे रहे हैं. This is against the fundamental of labor rights. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented if necessary by other means of social protection. So एक जस्ट और फेवरेबल एक मुआवजा मिलना चाहिए जो कोई भी काम कर रहा है, और वो ताकि वो अपने लिए, अपनी फैमिली के लिए, और एक ह्यूमन डिग्निटी के साथ वो एग्जिस्ट कर सके. और फिर इसके साथ साथ कुछ ज़रूरी चीज़ें जो कि सोशल प्रोटेक्शन के लिए ज़रूरी हैं, वो भी एक वर्कर का, एक लेबर का ज़रूरी हक है. Everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests. So there are certain labor unions who works for the protection of labor rights, and there are certain trade unions who work for the protection of the interest of the laborers or the workers. So this is the right of every laborer or the worker, so that they can join these unions for the protection of their rights. And everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. So this is the right that you can have a rest, you can take some free time, and there must be reasonable working hours. It must not be unjustified and undeclared and unannounced. So limited working hours and reasonable working hours, and there must be some periodic holidays. After some time, the labor must be given some holidays with pay. So this is the right of the workers and the laborers, that if they must have some, like it is necessary that they must have 4 holidays, 5 holidays, whatever the employer and the employee they agree upon, and it must be with pay. Like they must have some time for his family and for his friends, for the society. So, and the ILO and several other groups have sought international labor standards to create legal rights for workers across the world. So, International Labor Organization, the ILO, and many other groups, uh, they have created some standard so that can create the legal right of the workers across the world. Recent movements have also been made to encourage countries to promote labor rights at the international level through fair trade. Let's see what's the condition of labor laws in Pakistan. So laws are very much important for the protection of rights. So that's why how these rights or the labor's rights are protected. So first of all, we should understand that social and economic well-being of the people is one of the principal objectives of the government, and it is the basic purpose of the state that it always need it always work for the welfare and well-being of the people, and all laws are made for the betterment of the people. Labor policy, like policies in other fields, should also aim in attaining the objectives in a manner best suited to the resources of the country and the state of economy. There is an equally genuine requirement to create among workers and employers a better awareness of their obligations to the national objectives stated above. At the same time, the government recognizes that workers and employers must enjoy reasonable benefits as can be sustained by the economy without suffering setbacks. Labor laws in Pakistan, they are broad and contain several ordinances, acts, rules and regulations, and all other statutes relating to industrial, commercial and labor establishments. So we will see that what are the policies made for the protection of labor rights, what are the ordinances, what are the acts, and what are the statutes that are available for the protection of labor rights, and what what protects a right, that is law. So a state makes laws just to protect the rights of the people. So right after independence, Pakistan inherited different legislations from British India, which includes Trade Union Act 1926, Industrial Employment Standing Order Act 1946, Industrial Dispute Act 1926, and Factories Act 1934. So at that time, the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan was unable to go for such a huge legislation. So that's why they adopted already um, enforced or implemented laws, and these laws provided the basis for labor laws and policy making in the country and were progressive, and they allowed trade union activities in all sectors, and the workers had the right to rights of collective bargaining and even strike. The Trade Union Ordinance 1960, containing provisions of the earlier Act, was promulgated in 1960, and it established the principle of compulsory recognition of trade unions by employers. So trade union is basically an important part of the labor rights, because trade union, they actually work and strive hard for the protection of the labor rights. So it is necessary that these trade unions, they flourish and they work effectively. So it was made compulsory in 1960. 5 labor policies that been announced by the government in the year 1955, 1959, 1969, 1972, and 2002. All these policies basically laid down the parameters for: number one, the growth of trade unionism, protection of labor law in Pakistan, and worker rights, the settlement of industrial disputes, and redressal of worker grievances. So all policies, they needed two things. Number one, that they wanted the trade union to grow, and when trade union will grow, so what will happen, what the objective the state wanted to achieve, that the protection of the labor law, and the other one is the workers' right. And worker rights, what the objective state wanted to achieve from the workers' right, it is the settlement of industrial dispute and redressal of worker grievances. So these are very important of the labor policies, which were announced in different times. Labor rights in the Constitution of Pakistan. So this is not specifically for the just for the laborers only, but for everyone, and these are the fundamental rights in the Constitution of Pakistan. We have already discussed in detail when we talked about the fundamental rights in the Constitution of Pakistan in that very lecture. I will just briefly read over these articles to just remind you the these fundamental rights. And then Article 11 says that all forms of slavery, forced labor, and child labor is prohibited. No slavery, that if someone will be made slave, so definitely he must be engaged in the rigorous work or rigorous kind of labor. And forced labor, no one is forced to do something, and you cannot hire anyone forcefully. And child labor, this is prohibited, that a child cannot be hired for any kind of work. Number Article 17, it explains the right to exercise the freedom of association and the right to form unions. Article 18, rights of citizens to enter upon any lawful profession or occupation and to conduct any lawful trade or business. So it is the right of the citizen that they can start any lawful profession, any lawful business, any lawful occupation, and the citizens, they can conduct any lawful trade or business. Article 25 lays down the right to equality before the law and prohibition of discrimination on the ground of sex alone. In Article 37 makes provision of securing just and humane condition of work, ensuring that children and women are not employed in vocations unsuited to their age or sex, and for maternity benefits for women in employment. So these are the articles which are providing protection to the working class and the labor. So labor laws in Pakistan, let's see what happened in the history. So a quick review, like between 2000 to 2002, 20 laws consolidated into following 6 draft laws: the Industrial Relations Ordinance, Conditions of Employment Ordinance, Payment of Wages Ordinance, Occupational Safety and Health Ordinance, Labor Welfare and Social Security Ordinance, Human Resources Development and Control of Employment Ordinance. So these ordinances were promulgated or introduced at that time for the protection of labor rights. So the labor laws was initiated. Labor laws in Pakistan in the historical context, after 2002, no labor policy was introduced, although a number of developments took place in the intervening period, like from 2002 to 2002. So later, Prime Minister of Pakistan Yusuf Raza Gilani in his first speech emphasized the need to address the labor issues and announced the lifting of ban on trade unionism, repeal of Industrial Relations Ordinance 2002, removal from service Special Power Ordinance 2000, and other anti-labor laws. In pursuance of Prime Minister's direction, a new labor policy of the government is placed. So all those laws which are introduced earlier, and there was pressure on the government that they must be repealed. It is against the rights of the laborers or the working class. So the Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani, he announced in his very first speech that trade unionism will be active and there will be no ban on them, and he will repeal some ordinance. And in 2002, a new policy was adopted or placed. And the labor policy of 2010, it was announced on 1st May, and it was a policy that was grossly lacking on all grounds. It fell short of a policy document, lacking in research and insights on ground realities, and ignorant of government's own past and current initiatives. Constitutional experts raised the question of its validity after the abolition of the concurrent list under the 18th Amendment, which rendered labor a provincial subject. When this labor policy of 2010 was announced, so it was lacking a lot of things. Number one, that there was no research and insights on the ground realities. So what is actually happening with these laborers or the working class? So there was no research on that. So how people are being hired, whether they are providing safety protection or they are having any job security or not. And the government was actually ignorant of their past initiatives. And the most important thing is that in 18th Amendment it was rendered that the labor will be a provincial subject. Then this policy will not work at all. When labor is a provincial subject, then what is the need of this labor policy? It is the responsibility of the provinces now to make new policies and laws. And the labor policy, as we said earlier, that it was grossly lacking on all grounds. It was silent on agriculture workers' rights of unionization and collective bargaining. It only exceeds to cover agriculture workers in mechanized forms for compensation on death or injury under the Workmen's Compensation Act 1923. And on crucial issues of child labor and forced labor, the policy made this policy, it failed to outline strategic actions to address gender disparity in the workforce and in workplace. So a rampant violation, that was the huge violation of International Labour Organization Convention on Equal Remuneration for Equal Work and low participation of female workers. So it is indicative of anti-women work environment. So the International Labour Organization, it encourages and it emphasizes the states that they ensure that the equal remuneration for equal work made mandatory, and low participation of female workers is still very common in Pakistan. So the women must be given more chances, and they must be given equal opportunities, and the work environment must be suitable for the women as well. What are the issues with our operating labor laws? So most of them are applicable on workmen or employees and does not specifically include white-collar workers, which may be seen discriminatory against the upper working class, as they also expect protection of their rights. So what is the white-collar workmen? White-collar workers are those who are actually doing some Official jobs are the executive jobs who actually run the business. So these all labor laws are the policies. It does not include these white collar workers, and they also expect the protection of their rights. Section 5 of the West Pakistan Shops and Establishment Ordinance 1969 provides the categories on which the ordinance is not applicable, which also include the white collar employees. So this ordinance, this is a bit discriminatory, like it exempted few shops and few categories which were exempted from this ordinance, and it also included the white collar employees. So let's see that what are labor laws and whether they are applicable or not. So what's the applicable condition? The West Pakistan Shops and Establishments Ordinance 1969. The 1969 ordinance regulates the work hours and other conditions of work and employment of persons employed in shops and commercial, industrial and other establishments in Pakistan, applicable on employees. And this is in practice that the work hours and other condition of works, it is regulated under this ordinance, the West Pakistan Shops and Establishment Ordinance, that people must be hired for a specific time. The work hours and the standard work hours in Pakistan are 8 hours, and everywhere around the globe as well, and it is applicable on the employees. The West Pakistan Industrial and Commercial Employment Ordinance 1968 applies to all industrial and commercial establishments in Pakistan. So what it actually regulates, that 20 or more workmen are employed directly or through any other person, whether on behalf of himself or another person. This is specifically applicable on workmen. So labor laws and their applicability, we are actually discussing that different labor laws are ordinances which regulate the affairs of the laborers or the workmen, how actually they are, what is the condition of their applicability, either they are in practice or not. So the West Pakistan Maternity Benefit Ordinance 1958 regulates the employment of women in establishments in Pakistan. So it does not specify if women include the white collar working women. So the West Pakistan Maternity Benefit Ordinance, it actually regulates the employment of women in all establishments in Pakistan. It is the governmental job or government offices or the other businesses or the companies or trade. But here again in this ordinance, it does not specify if women include the white collar working women. The Employers' Liability Act 1938 provides that certain defenses shall not be raised in suits for damages in Pakistan in respect of injuries sustained by workmen. So the employer's liability is that if a labor or workman faces some injuries or any or damage, so he might ask for some remedies. So that is known as suit for damage. So some injuries, they are some defenses are provided to the employers that in case of these injuries, the workman is not entitled to any damage. The Employees Old Age Benefit Act 1976 provides for the certain old age benefits for the persons who are employed in industrial, commercial, and other organizations, and it is applicable on workmen. The Disabled Person Ordinance 1981 provides for the employment, rehabilitation, and welfare of disabled persons, and for matter connected therewith. It is applicable on employee. The Employment of Children Act 1991, it prohibits the employment of children in certain occupation and to regulate the conditions of work of children. The Essential Personnel Ordinance 1948 provides for the compulsory registration of essential personnel at employment exchanges in Pakistan. The Companies Profits Act 1968 provides for the participation of workers in the profits of companies, and the companies, they don't share their benefit or profit with their employees. This is quite common, and there are labor courts in Pakistan. So actually our laborers, they are underpaid. They don't have enough money to initiate their cases for their right. So that's why the inactivity of laws or applicability of laws is there. Labor laws and their applicability, there are certain more ordinances and acts. The Workers' Welfare Fund Ordinance provides for the establishment of a worker welfare fund providing residential accommodation and other facilities for workers and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The Workmen's Compensation Act 1923 provides for the payment by certain classes of employers of compensation for injury caused to workmen by accident arising out of or in the course of his employment. So if it causes any injury, so it gives the labor a right to claim damages. The Provincial Employees Social Security Ordinance 1965, it includes a scheme of social security for providing benefits to certain employees or their dependents in the events of sickness, maternity, employment injury, or death, and for matters ancillary thereto. The Employees' Cost of Living Relief Act 1973 provides for the payment of cost of living allowance to employees and applies to all undertakings in Pakistan. So if someone is doing a job, so it was made necessary that the employer, it must pay a living allowance to their employees. What are the recommendations? Like we have seen that there are different laws, few are applicable and few are not. So what should the government do to protect the labor rights? Number one is after 18th Amendment, the Constitution clearly enunciates that the labor legislation is now a provincial subject. All provinces and territories in Pakistan should coordinate with one another to ensure that labor legislation is as uniform as possible across Pakistan. There must be a uniform policy for labor rights, like the same policy for all provinces and territories. And it must reduce number of laws. There are certain, I think, more than 25 ordinances and acts that are applicable in Pakistan. So the government must reduce the number of laws. Fewer laws, easier to implement and comply with and enforce. So there is a huge number of laws, but they are not applicable. Rights and obligations, easier to understand. So it must be made easier for the laborers to understand their rights and obligation, and they must be guided. They must be provided guidelines about their rights and obligations, and the simplification and reduction of paperwork and procedures. It must be made because majority of the laborers, they are not literate, so they are unaware that how to fill a form. So this is quite common in Pakistan, that the employer, he kick them out from the job, and when they are fired, so they don't know what to do. They simply go home. So they don't know what are their rights. It is the duty of the government to make it easier for the laborers to understand their rights and their obligations. And the paperwork, when the laborers, they don't know what to write and what to do, so it must be made simplified. And when it will be made simplified, when the laws, number of laws will be reduced, so it will be cost saving and time saving for all stakeholders. So unnecessary litigation will be discouraged, और लोग जो भी हैं whatever the labor, उनके लिए भी this is gonna be quite easier. So they will not spend a lot of money for their rights, and it will be time saving as well. Like, people will focus on their job. And the government must remove overlapping repetition and redundancies, conflict, gaps, and loopholes. And creation of a seamless and comprehensive legislative framework. And number 7, that laws applicable on conditions of employment should be bifurcated into separate laws applicable to commercial establishments and industrial establishments, and laws relating to payment of wages and minimum wage should not be separate laws, as they are a major condition of employment and should be incorporated into laws relating to conditions of employment in industrial and commercial establishments respectively. So that's all. If you have any question, so you can ask.